10 Controversial Unsolved Spousal Disappearances. True crime stories of spousal disappearances are particularly popular with the media, because they can provide a lot of sensationalized material. If it turns out that a missing person was going through a troubled relationship at the time of their disappearance, a lot of suspicion is going to fall upon the partner. In some cases, there might be very incriminating evidence to suggest said partner is responsible for the disappearance, but it's impossible to build a solid murder case without a body. The following stories involve a spouse who went missing under suspicious and controversial circumstances, leading to a lot of surprising twists and turns which seem to point the finger at their significant other. 1. Michelle Harris. Michelle resided on a 252-acre estate on Hagedorn Road in Oego, New York in 2001. She was in the process of divorcing her husband, Calvin Harris, at the time of her disappearance. She had filed for divorce 8 months previously. A photograph of Calvin is posted below this case summary. Michelle and Calvin have 4 children together and the family was all residing at the same house. Michelle's attorney said that she had obtained an order of protection from Calvin while they continued to live together. It prohibited any mental or physical abuse. The divorce was described as complicated, and Calvin did not want to end the marriage. Michelle had sexual relationships with several other men while she was married to Calvin, and Calvin had been unfaithful as well. Michelle's attorney stated she feared the power of Calvin and her in-laws, who owned several car dealerships in the local region and are considered a prominent business family. Her lawyer said that the divorce would be finalized soon and Michelle would be financially secure for the rest of her life. Calvin had offered her custody of their children, and $80,000 a year for the next 10 years. Michelle's loved one said that she was looking forward to a fresh start with her children. She had taken a job at Lefty's, a restaurant in the 400 block of Broad Street in Waverly, New York, and sometimes went to bars after work. Calvin told family members and the police that Michelle was drinking heavily and possibly using cocaine around the time of her disappearance, but Michelle's relatives and friends deny that she ever drank to excess or used illegal drugs. Her boss describes her as an ideal employee who is well liked by her co-workers and restaurant patrons. Michelle planned to visit New York City on September 13th and 14th. She told Calvin she planned to meet a former classmate from the State University of New York at Morrisville, where she'd gotten an associate's degree in business administration. Michelle told others, however, that she was going to New York City to pawn some of her jewelry, including her Rolex watch and 2-carat diamond engagement ring. She was having financial problems at the time. Calvin was ordered to cover the mortgage, bills and other household expenses in addition to giving Michelle $400 a week in spending money, but she had run up $16,000 in credit card debt and owed $1,000 to her children's babysitter. Michelle spent the day of September 11, 2001 with her family. She worked her evening shift and departed from the establishment at 9:30 p.m. She never arrived at her own home and has not been heard from again. Michelle's minivan, a gold 2000 Ford Windstar with New York dealer plates, was discovered abandoned on September 12 by the Harris family housekeeper. It was on the road shoulder near the entrance to the Harris property in the vicinity of the 300 block of Hagedorn Hill Road in Spencer, New York. The keys were still in the ignition. An extensive search of the area produced no clues as to Michelle's whereabouts. There has been no activity on her cellular phone, bank accounts, or credit cards since her disappearance. Tiny drops of her blood were found in the kitchen and garage of her home. There were no other indications of foul play. Calvin suggested other men in Michelle's life might have caused her disappearance. She was seeing 2 boyfriends at the time she went missing. On the night Michelle disappeared, she had drinks with one of her boyfriends, Michael Casper, and a friend of his, Michael Hakes, then stopped at the Barton, New York apartment of her second boyfriend, Brian Early. He said she left between 11 o'clock and 11:30 p.m. Michelle's relationship with Casper was a secret. Not even her best friend knew about it. Early, who had met her in the fall of 2000, said he loved her and hoped to marry her after her divorce from Calvin was final. Authorities took a closer look at Hakes when they found out he was a convicted rapist who had served a decade in prison in Arizona. They could find nothing to tie him to Michelle's disappearance. However, all 3 men cooperated fully with the investigation and passed polygraphs. According to witnesses, Calvin seemed unusually calm and nonchalant about his wife's disappearance. Only a week after she vanished, he said he planned to sell all her belongings at a garage sale. Within 3 weeks, he rekindled a relationship with an old girlfriend. Police considered him the prime suspect in Michelle's disappearance from the onset of the investigation, but he didn't face charges in her case for years. In 2005, 4 years after Michelle's disappearance, Calvin was charged with murder in connection with her case. The prosecution theorized he beat her to death in her home on the day of her disappearance. A judge threw out the murder indictment in early 2007, citing flaws in the grand jury proceedings. Calvin was re-indicted on the same charge less than a month later. A blood spatter expert testified, saying the bloodstains in Michelle's kitchen and garage appeared to be fresh and their size and shape were indicative of blunt force trauma. Calvin's attorney argued there was no evidence to indicate Michelle was even deceased. Calvin was convicted of second-degree murder in June 2007. However, in November 2007, a judge overturned the conviction and ordered another trial. The judge based his decision on the testimony of a surprise witness who came forward after Calvin's conviction and claimed to have seen Michelle alive. Hours after Calvin supposedly killed her, the witness said she was standing at the foot of her driveway, arguing with another man. Calvin was retried in August 2009, and convicted of second-degree murder again. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. But in October 2012, the conviction was overturned again. At his third trial in May 2015, the jury was unable to reach a verdict and the judge declared a mistrial. At his fourth murder trial in the spring of 2016, Calvin waived his right to trial by jury and was tried by a judge instead. He was acquitted of all charges. Calvin and Michelle's children have supported Calvin since her disappearance, saying they fully believed in their father's innocence. Foul play is suspected in Michelle's disappearance due to the circumstances involved. 2. Joan Hansen. Joan was last seen in King County, Washington on August 10, 1962. She planned to meet her sisters at the World's Fair in Seattle, Washington, but never arrived. She was talking on the phone with a friend, Patricia Martin, and suddenly said, "Oh my God, he's in the basement. He's coming." Joan screamed and the line went dead. Martin repeatedly called Joan back, and at first no one answered the phone. After several attempts, Joan's estranged husband, Robert Milton Bob Hansen, came on the line. Martin asked where Joan was and Robert said, "She's with you." Joan has never been heard from again, and all her belongings were left behind except a blue sequined dress, one of her favorite outfits. Joan's Chevrolet Biscayne was found abandoned weeks after her disappearance in the Queen Anne Hill neighborhood of Seattle. The windows were rolled down, the tires were flat, and the interior was dusty, filthy and cluttered with debris such as empty bottles, food wrappers and cigarette butts. There were no usable fingerprints, no signs of foul play and no indication of Joan's whereabouts. She normally kept her car in a neat and clean condition. An extensive search of the area turned up no sign of her, and a private detective her parents hired was also unable to locate her. Joan married a man she'd went to school with and had 2 children by him, but her first marriage ended in divorce after the couple's daughter died of sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS, and Joan had an affair with another man. During this period she was hospitalized briefly for emotional problems caused by the stress in her life. After her divorce, in either 1956 or 1957, she married Robert, who made a living as a carpenter and fisherman. They had 2 sons and 1 daughter during the first 3 years of their marriage. Robert severely beat Joan's oldest son when he was about 6 years old, injuring the child so badly that he couldn't walk afterward. The boy stayed with Martin for 2 months, after which his father, Joan's ex-husband, filed for custody. Robert also physically abused Joan on a regular basis, even while she was pregnant, and the couple's children were afraid of him. She told Martin she was afraid for her life. Robert refused to let her tell the children about any of their relatives on her side of the family. They didn't even know about her oldest son. In May 1962, Joan moved in with Martin and went to an attorney, told him about the abuse, showed him her bruises and filed for divorce. She and Robert fought bitterly over the division of the family's assets, worth $300,000. And on August 8, Joan got a restraining order against him. The order required him to vacate the family home and let Joan move back into it. 2 days later, she disappeared. Robert reported her missing on August 15. Joan's attorney continued the divorce action in her absence. On November 21, the divorce was granted. Robert denied abusing Joan, accused her of stealing $8,000 from him, and sought to keep all of the property and assets, but the judge ruled there was sufficient evidence to indicate Joan had been abused by her husband. She was given 40% of the marital property and Robert got 60%. The court ordered that if she did not return alive, her share would be held in trust for her children until they came of age. In spite of the court order, Joan's share of the property eventually came under Robert's control and their children got nothing. Joan never used her social security number after her disappearance, or left any other paper trail. She was declared legally dead in 1975. Robert raised their children alone after the divorce and made a fortune in the construction business and with rental properties he owned. He was arrested several times over the years for assaulting people and destroying property in anger. Once he advertised for a housekeeper and, when a woman responded to the ad, he kept her on his property against her will for 3 days before she escaped. Police briefly suspected he was the Green River Killer, a serial murderer of prostitutes who operated in the Seattle, Tacoma area and was responsible for numerous disappearances as well as homicides. The Green River Killer was eventually identified as Gary Leon Ridgway. Robert spent his later years traveling back and forth between Washington state and Costa Rica in Central America. He struck up relationships with women in the country and got married and divorced at last twice, possibly more times. He was denied Costa Rican citizenship, however, and moved back to the United States for good. The Hansen children grew up believing Joan had abandoned them. Joan and Robert's daughter became addicted to drugs as a young adult and died of an overdose in the 1980s. Their 2 sons, who described Robert as an extremely abusive parent, now believe he murdered their mother. The police have long considered him a person of interest in her case. Robert committed suicide in his Auburn, Washington home in August 2009. Leaving an estate worth $5 million. He was 84 years old. He never faced charges in his first wife's disappearance. In his will, Robert wrote Joan had disappeared years ago and, if she was alive, she was to inherit nothing. He also disinherited his children. By the time of his death he'd been estranged from them for years. In December 2009, his sons filed a wrongful death suit against his estate, alleging he'd caused their mother's death. They were awarded $100,000 in damages. 4 years after her disappearance, there were rumors that Joan's body was buried beneath a barn on a farm in the Kent Valley along the Green River, on property the Hansen family had once owned. The barn had originally had a dirt floor, but a concrete floor was poured around the time of her disappearance. The building has since been demolished and Kent-Des Moines Road now runs over where it used to be. In 2006, at Joan's son's request, investigators examined the road with ground-penetrating radar. No evidence was located, however. Joan's case remains unsolved. The noted true crime writer Ann Rule lived near the Hansen family in the 1960s. She didn't know Joan and didn't hear about her disappearance when it happened, but her children knew Joan's children and had gone to school with them. Rule profiled Joan's case in her 2009 book, Don't Look Behind You, and Other True Cases, the 15th book in her Crime Files series. 3. Rita Fiorretti. One afternoon last April, a headless body turned up on the banks of the Hudson River at the northern tip of Manhattan. 4 months later, medical examiners identified it as that of Rita Fiorretti, a 35-year-old mother of 2 who mysteriously disappeared in the summer of 1986 from her home on City Island. The discovery answered one question: what happened to Mrs. Fiorretti? But not another: who killed her? The death has become the focus of an unusual murder investigation. The Bronx District Attorney's Office has named her estranged husband Robert Fiorretti, a former New York City police officer, as a suspect. But it has done so without physical evidence linking him to the crime and it has not arrested him. A lawyer for Mr. Fiorretti has said that the accusation is outrageous and that press inquiries, which he generally declines to answer, only force his client into the impossible task of trying to prove a negative, that is, that he did not kill Mrs. Fiorretti. The district attorney, Paul T. Gentile, acknowledged that the evidence in the case thus far is circumstantial, but said he was justified in calling Mr. Fiorretti the prime suspect. Prosecutors get closer to indicting him every day, he said. "This is why there's no statute of limitations to murders," Mr. Gentile said. Meanwhile, as a grand jury investigates the case, Mr. Fiorretti is living in his old house on City Island, which, after a year on Long Island, he moved back into 8 days after Mrs. Fiorretti disappeared. He brought with him a trailer of possessions and his former patrol partner, who was pregnant with their child at the time and whom he married a month later. He began looking after the 2 children from his first marriage, who needed a parent after their mother disappeared. Hours after Mrs. Fiorretti failed to show up for a business meeting on August 10, 1986, her employer, the International Paper Company in Manhattan, began asking after her. When authorities reached Mr. Fiorretti on Long Island a few days later, police reports at the time said, he told them that his estranged wife was an alcoholic who had run away with other men before and that there was no reason to be very concerned about her. Neighbors on City Island, her former colleagues at work and her closest living relative all dispute that. "She would never have left a 3-year-old child like that," said Evelyn McCurdy, Mrs. Fiorretti's stepsister, who was interviewed by telephone at her home in Baltimore. "Rita was a very sweet, very dedicated mother, very responsible," said a neighbor. "She never let those children out of her sight." Mrs. Fiorretti had 2 sons, Robert Jr., who was 14 at the time, and Stephen, who was 3. Barely a week after she disappeared, Mr. Fiorretti moved into the City Island house with his former patrol partner, Maureen Brooks, an officer in the 113th Precinct in Queens. In September 1986 he married her, and 2 months later she gave birth to their daughter. Obtained secret divorce. Whether his marriage to Ms. Brooks was legal, given that Mrs. Fiorretti was not officially dead at the time, is open to question. In a Brooklyn court in 1974, Mr. Fiorretti obtained a divorce from Mrs. Fiorretti, which Bronx prosecutors say was fraudulent because he used a false address and got a friend to falsely swear that papers had been served on his wife. By all accounts, Mrs. Fiorretti never knew of the divorce, and the couple continued to live together for nearly 10 years, during which she gave birth to a second son. Mr. Fiorretti's reason for obtaining the secret divorce remains unclear. By the end of the year, authorities began to say that, while Mrs. Fiorretti was still officially missing, she was presumed dead. In January 1987, Mr. Fiorretti was indicted on the charge of stealing $17,617.74 from her bank account, and he was dismissed from the police for refusing to answer questions about the charges. According to prosecutors, 2 months after the disappearance, he forged a withdrawal slip in an attempt to transfer the money from an account held by Mrs. Fiorretti to one that he shared with Miss Brooks. He was also charged with filing false tax and medical insurance forms in which he had claimed Mrs. Fiorretti as a dependent. Didn't do it in Bronx. However, most of those charges were dismissed last July. The judge who did so, John P. Collins of State Supreme Court, did not comment on the substance of the charges, but said that because the alleged withdrawal occurred in Nassau County and the forms were compiled by an accountant in Westchester, Mr. Fiorretti could not be tried in the Bronx. Whatever they think he did, which they have yet to prove, he didn't do it in the Bronx, if he did it at all, Mr. Fiorretti's attorney, David M. Richman, said at the time. Prosecutors in Westchester and Nassau are reviewing the cases now, but are not expected to act until it becomes clear whether charges will be made in Mrs. Fiorretti's killing. Late one afternoon last month, Mr. Gentile called reporters to his office and made a dramatic announcement. Mrs. Fiorretti's body had been found. He said investigators had matched X-rays of the body, which had lain unidentified in a city morgue for 5 months, to medical records of Mrs. Fiorretti. The body had been in the water for well over a year, and apparently washed ashore when it came loose from weights that held it down. Sample of brother's hair. The medical examiner's office issued a death certificate, and Mr. Gentile said prosecutors could officially proceed with a murder investigation. But no murder charges appear imminent. There have been other unusual actions in the case. Prosecutors have also asked a judge to allow them to take hair samples from Mr. Fiorretti's brother, Alan Fiorretti, who lives in New Jersey. Although they have not said he is a suspect, they said they wanted to determine whether 2 hairs found in the trash bag containing Mrs. Fiorretti's dismembered body were consistent with his hair. Alan Fiorretti's lawyer, David Bernheim, called the request unjustified. Robert Fiorretti's lawyer, Mr. Richman, said his client was angry and confused about media coverage. He said, and does feel a sense of loss. There is no reason for Robert Fiorretti to discuss this case at all, Mr. Richman added. I can only tell you that he has no responsibility here. He had nothing to do whatsoever with a disappearance. 4. Dorene Mario. Dorene was last seen in her home on Hartford Avenue in Johnstone, Rhode Island on March 29, 1990. She disappeared from there and has never been heard from again. She had a poor relationship with her husband of 7 years, Stephen Mario, and had quit her purchasing director job at the Rhode Island School of Design to work on their marriage. On the day of Dorene's disappearance, Stephen took a 70-minute lunch break from work. His lunch breaks were usually only 20 to 30 minutes. He claims he went home, ate lunch with Dorene, and went back to work, and when he returned home at 4 p.m. that day she was gone. Dorene was supposed to call her mother on the day of her disappearance. She did not. Stephen said packed a suitcase with a week's worth of clothes and took $600 from the safe when she left their home. She did not, however, take her 1984 Ford Tempo, her toothbrush, her hair curlers, her 2 pet cats, or any of the $50,000 in her and Stephen's joint bank accounts. There was no sign of a struggle at the residence. Stephen did not report Dorene missing for 2 days. At the time of her disappearance, he suspected she was having an affair and had hired private detectives to follow her. There is no evidence that Dorene was actually being unfaithful, however. Investigators do not believe Dorene left of her own accord. They think Stephen murdered her. Her family says she was close to them and would never have left without contacting them. In June 1990, police received 2 typewritten letters. The first one stated that Stephen had strangled Dorene on the day of her disappearance and dumped her body in a pond in Providence, Rhode Island. The second letter accused Dorene of having affairs with some of her co-workers, men which the letter identified by name. Both letters were typed on a typewriter from Stephen's mother's house. Authorities believe Stephen wrote them, although the letters refer to him in the third person. When the police confronted Stephen about the letters, he hired an attorney and stopped cooperating in the investigation. 9 years after Dorene's disappearance, in 1999, Stephen told his family members he was going on vacation to straighten out his life. Shortly after he returned, he shot his estranged girlfriend to death and seriously wounded her new boyfriend, then drove to a secluded reservoir in Connecticut and shot himself in the head. He left a suicide note for his mother which referred to his feelings of guilt about Dorene's disappearance but did not say what happened to her. Stephen was never charged in connection with his wife's disappearance, but investigators believe he was responsible. Dorene's mother, however, describes Stephen as a kind and supportive man. She does not believe he was involved in her daughter's disappearance. Some agencies state that Dorene disappeared on March 30, 1990. 5. Mike Williams. Mike was last seen leaving his residence in the vicinity of the 5000 block of Centennial Oak Circle in Tallahassee, Florida on December 16, 2000. He was supposedly going duck hunting at Lake Seminole. He has never been heard from again. Mike's boat and his green and tan 1994 Ford Bronco were later found at the lake. There was no sign of him at the scene. Authorities initially believed Mike died in a hunting accident. Possibly he fell out of his boat and drowned. His wife, Denise Merrill Williams, accepted the story and obtained a death certificate for her husband 6 months after his disappearance. A 44-day search of the lake turned up no signs of Mike or his body. Investigators believed his remains had been consumed by alligators, but they later learned that alligators do not feed in the winter months and, in any case, they could not consume an adult man's body without leaving a trace. Every other drowning victim in Lake Seminole has eventually surfaced, but Mike's body has never been found. Police now believe Mike is missing under suspicious circumstances and possibly met with foul play. He did not normally hunt alone as he is supposed to have done on the day of his disappearance, and his truck was found parked at an undeveloped landing rather than at the nearby concrete ramp he normally used. His boat was found idling in Lake Seminole, full of gasoline. If he had fallen out while the boat was running, it should have kept going in circles until it ran out of gas. Mike's waders were found floating in 10 or 12 feet of water in a weed-choked part of Lake Seminole 6 months after he allegedly drowned, and 8 days before Denise had Mike declared legally dead. A lightweight hunting jacket and a small flashlight were also located on the lake bottom that same day. The waders were found in an area that had already been thoroughly searched, and there were no holes or teeth marks in them. Authorities believe the waders and the other items were planted in the lake after the search was over. Mike's friends stated he did not normally put the waders on until he had reached his designated hunting spot, and for safety reasons he would never have driven the boat while wearing them. The investigation into Mike's disappearance was compromised because his case was initially believed to be a drowning. By the time police started looking into other theories, the potential crime scene had been contaminated and evidence was lost or destroyed. In 2008, investigators stated they were investigating Mike's disappearance as a possible case of insurance fraud. Denise collected $1.5 million in life insurance for Mike after he was declared dead. The person who wrote the policy was his best friend, Brian Winchester. In 2004, Denise married Winchester, whom she had known since early childhood. They lived together in the house she had shared with Mike. Mike is a graduate of North Florida Christian High School. At the time of his disappearance, he made a high salary as a real estate appraiser and lived in an upscale neighborhood. He enjoys hunting and other outdoor pursuits. His loved ones stated they did not believe he staged his disappearance and left of his own accord, as he was close to his wife, baby daughter and recently widowed mother. His case remains unsolved. 6. Michelle Parker, the mother of a missing Florida woman who disappeared the same day her case appeared on the People's Court, said that her daughter was humiliated by the show. Michelle Parker, a mother of 3, was last seen Thursday afternoon when she dropped off her 3-year-old twins at her ex-fiancé Dale Smith's home. Parker also has an 11-year-old son from a previous relationship. The feuding couple appeared on the People's Court to resolve a dispute about the $5,000 engagement ring that Parker, 32, allegedly drunkenly threw over a hotel balcony during an argument. Parker's mother Yvonne Stewart told ABC News that when Michelle returned from taping the show in the summer, she said, "It was the most humiliating experience of my life. I don't even ever want to see it. I wish I had never gone." Stewart said the appearance on the show was Smith's idea for resolving their dispute. The show offered glimpses into the couple's tumultuous on-again, off-again relationship that dates back to 2006. "He gets pretty malicious and vindictive, especially when he's been drinking," Parker said in court. "He shouldn't have put his hands on me and shouldn't have put his hands on me prior," she said. "He shouldn't have left me 3 or 4 times over the past year and a half that we've been together." On the show, Parker accused Smith of cheating on her with at least 7 different women and they argued about visitation rights regarding their twins. Despite the fights and allegations of cheating, Parker's mother told ABC News that Smith is a great father who cares about her grandchildren and her daughter. "He is crying every time I talk to him on the phone," Stewart said. "He loves my daughter. They just didn't get along." When asked if she believes Smith could have anything to do with Parker's disappearance, she said, "We don't know. I don't know." Judge Marilyn Millian ruled on the show that the couple should both have to pay for the ring and ruled in Smith's favor, ordering Parker to pay him $2,500. "He doesn't deserve either half after what he's done and put me through, but it is what it is," Parker told a court reporter on her way out of the courtroom. "This fatal attraction relationship here, is there still anything left to it?" the reporter asked. "No, it's over," Parker replied. When Smith exited the courtroom, he told the reporter he was a little upset and said regarding the relationship, "As far as I'm concerned, it's done. She's the one. She sent me this text message last night saying she still cares and she's just so confused. Now she's changing her story again. Maybe she's bipolar." Parker's family is fearful, but still hopeful. "If anybody has her and you're holding her hostage, please let her go," Stewart said. "Let her come home so she can raise her babies." Hundreds of volunteers have been organizing searches since Thursday, passing out flyers and making t-shirts. The Michelle Parker Missing Person Facebook page has more than 3,500 followers. "My wife's out there. Everybody is searching and let's hope we find her and bring her home," Parker's father Brad Parker told GMA. Parker's Humvee was recovered on Friday, but authorities say they have not yet found her iPhone. "We did find cell phones, but we did not find her cell phone," Orlando County Police Department spokesman Sergeant Jim Young told UpNews.com. "We've been receiving a lot of tips. There are constant tips coming and we're following up on every one," Young said, "We don't want to rule anything out. Everything we're doing is for the safe return of Michelle. That's what we're focused on." Through contributions from family and friends, a $13,000 reward is being offered for information about Parker's whereabouts. "We're treating it as a missing persons case," Young said. "We're not saying anyone is a suspect or person of interest. But we're talking to everyone that knows and knew her." When asked if she believes her daughter is still alive, a teary-eyed Stewart replied, "I do. I have reason to believe that she's still alive. Absolutely." 7. Dorothy Kaylor. Dorothy was married to Joan Kaylor, an entomologist and aerial photography specialist, in 1985. Joan was often out of town for work-related reasons and Dorothy was alone at their Concord, California residence much of the time. Her sister told authorities that Joan was allegedly abusive towards Dorothy. She cited a report of domestic violence at Thanksgiving 1981, an incident that was investigated by law enforcement. Joan had hit Dorothy in the face with a typing stand while they were arguing and she drove herself to the hospital for stitches. No charges were filed against anyone in the matter, as Joan claimed Dorothy threatened him with a pair of scissors and he hit her in self-defense. Dorothy's sister stated that there were numerous problems in the Kaylors' marriage, an allegation that Joan denies. He said that the only difficulties in the relationship revolved around his wife's mental health issues. Dorothy's friends say Joan was repeatedly unfaithful to her. He had proposed marriage to a co-worker 6 months before Dorothy's disappearance, and they purchased wedding rings. Dorothy joined a support group for battered women in early 1985. She was attempting to regain her self-confidence and reportedly planned to divorce Joan. Dorothy opened her own bank account, applied for credit cards in her own name, and rented a post office box. She also asked a friend to keep a locked file cabinet with her important documents. Included in the cabinet was a $5,000 cashier's check, which Dorothy had inherited and kept secret from Joan. The check was due to expire in a few months. Joan announced that he accepted a new position in Utah with the United States Department of Forestry in June 1985. Dorothy's family members said that she planned to stay in Concord. She told Joan she wanted a divorce, and they agreed that she would pay him for his half of the house and when he went to Utah, she would own the house in Concord. She packed up Joan's possessions and put them in storage. Dorothy told family members at the time that Joan threatened her, but he denies this. Joan told authorities that his wife packed an overnight bag and told him she was visiting a friend in California on June 12, 1985. Joan said that he drove Dorothy to the Bay Area Rapid Transit BART station in Pleasant Hill later that day and watched her walk inside the building. She has never been heard from again. Joan said she was carrying her bag and a turquoise leather purse when she disappeared. The purse contained several items including Dorothy's medical card and a bee sting kit. Joan worked in San Francisco on June 13. He said that he found Dorothy's blue 1963 Volkswagen Beetle parked next to his vehicle at the BART station upon his return to Pleasant Hill later in the day. Her purse was inside her car, along with her driver's license, a current Diablo Valley College student identification card, $30 in cash, library card, and monogrammed off-white leather billfold, but there was no sign of her at the scene. The bee sting kit was missing. Dorothy's loved ones say it would be uncharacteristic of her to leave her purse behind if she went anywhere. Joan claimed that he left a note for his wife on her vehicle, hid her purse under the seat, locked the doors, and moved the car so she would not receive a parking ticket. He told investigators that the Beetle remained in its spot on June 14, and he moved the car again. Authorities stated that the note Joan wrote began in an affectionate manner, saying he was worried about her, then accused Dorothy of messing up Joan's life by refusing to sign loan papers. There was a postscript wherein Joan maintained that it was Dorothy's idea, not his, for him to seek out other women. Joan reported Dorothy as a missing person to authorities on June 17, 5 days after her disappearance, after a neighbor urged him to do so. Although he said Dorothy was not supposed to return home until June 24, he relocated to Utah less than 2 weeks later. Joan packed the majority of Dorothy's belongings inside their California residence prior to his move, repainted the inside of the house, and put it up for rent. He signed the rent contract on June 7, 5 days before he last saw Dorothy, although he told her loved ones that he was forced to put the house up for rent because her signature was required to sell it. Dorothy's loved ones became concerned for her safety when she failed to contact anyone. She never claimed any of the money she saved in her bank account. Jewel never had Dorothy declared legally deceased, but when he retired, he filed for divorce from her on grounds of desertion. A judge granted the divorce and awarded all the marital property to Jewel, but Dorothy's sister, Diane Rusnick, filed a lawsuit and the divorce was set aside. The Utah judge subsequently ruled that Dorothy was dead at the time Jewel sought the divorce, so there was no marriage to dissolve. After Dorothy's disappearance, Jewel wrote a letter to his new fiancée, saying he had made a Herculean effort to be with her which she might not understand, and that he would do anything for her, even commit murder. In 1988, the police received a letter postmarked Gary, Indiana, which accused Jewel of murdering Dorothy. The letter stated Jewel had beaten Dorothy to death with a tire iron and buried her body under a birch tree in a remote area of Concord where new homes were being built. A map to the supposed burial location was included with the letter. Authorities determined that the DNA from saliva on the stamp and envelope flap has male characteristics, but they have been unable to match it to anyone. A document examiner believes the letter's handwriting is similar to Jewel's, but no definitive match has been made in that area either. The author of the letter has never been identified. Joan Morris, a reporter for the Contra Costa Times, interviewed Jewel during the summer of 2001, 16 years after Dorothy vanished. Jewel told Morris that he forgot about his wife's disappearance, saying that he assumed Dorothy was deceased. He now lives in Utah. He attempted to run for the state legislature, but withdrew his candidacy after party members learned the police were investigating Dorothy's disappearance. Jewel changed his version of his wife's 1985 disappearance when she spoke to Morris. He now claims that he never drove Dorothy to the BART station in Pleasant Hill and said he thought she drove herself. Dorothy was born in Churton, Ohio. She is described as a very religious Catholic who loved to read and write. She attended secretarial school after graduating high school and got a job as a legal secretary. She met Jewel in 1970. He was married at the time and had a child, but Dorothy did not know this until after she had dated him for several months. Jewel divorced his wife to marry Dorothy in 1975. She never claimed the check she left behind at her friend's home. It expired in October 1985. Concord authorities reopened Dorothy's case in August 2001. And are hoping to uncover new leads in her disappearance. In December 2005, they requested a warrant to search Dorothy and Jewel's former home. Court documents indicate that authorities believe Jewel murdered his wife, but there is insufficient evidence to charge him as of yet. The search turned up no physical evidence. Rusnick has filed a lawsuit against Jewel. She requested that Dorothy be declared legally dead and Rusnick be appointed executor of her estate. A judge found evidence that Dorothy was deceased, but the lawsuit has been stalled pending the outcome of the police investigation into her disappearance. No charges have been filed against anyone in Dorothy's case. 8. Mary Buiko. Mary was employed as a house cleaner in Sherman, Connecticut in 1984. She had a stormy relationship with her husband, Dominic Buiko Sr., and had left him for short periods of time in the past. Shortly before she disappeared, Mary found out Dominic was having an affair. He had a history of infidelity as well as domestic violence. She decided to file for divorce. Mary's adult daughters last heard from her on August 19. They reported her missing on August 31. Dominic claimed that he saw Mary for the last time on August 20, when she packed all of her belongings and left their residence in the 20 block of Wakeman Hill Road. None of Mary's personal items were located inside the house by her daughters. Her 1982 Chevrolet Cavalier was parked outside of their home. At the end of the long driveway, the windshield on the driver's side of the vehicle had been smashed inward and shards of glass were on the front seat. A photo of the car is posted below this case summary. Mary's car keys and her wedding ring were placed on the kitchen counter. Her clothes were missing, as were all of the framed photos of her. Dominic claimed that he gave Mary between $100,000 and $250,000 to leave their residence and as an informal settlement. He maintained that she simply packed her things and left after receiving the cash. Mary's daughters had a close relationship with Mary in 1984. One of her daughters had just given birth to Mary's first grandchild, and the other was engaged to be married at the time. Other loved ones stated she would never leave the vicinity without sharing her plans. Dominic told Mary's children not to tell anyone she was gone. When they reported her disappearance, he told the police she left him. He admitted having smashed her car windshield. The police decided not to seize the vehicle, as there was no evidence of foul play. The car disappeared sometime later and has never been located. There's no record of it being sold or given away. A woman and her daughters moved in with Dominic less than a week after Mary disappeared. Dominic said he had moved in with his sister and was only renting his house to the woman, but he later married her. 2 days before Mary was reported missing, Dominic filed for divorce on grounds of abandonment. Divorce proceedings for Mary and Dominic took place in August 1985, 9 months after she vanished. Mary was not represented at the hearing and Dominic continued to insist that she left their home after receiving his cash offering. There has not been any evidence of the cash or any trace of Mary's belongings since her disappearance. Mary's case was upgraded from a missing persons case to a homicide in 1990. 6 years after she disappeared, investigators received a tip from an informant that Mary was killed after members of the Hells Angels motorcycle gang issued a contract on her life. Dominic's son Joseph, who has a criminal record for arson, is a member of the gang. Reportedly, Joseph and an accomplice, Steve Kendall, killed Mary because she was going to go to the police with incriminating information about Dominic. Joseph was interviewed in prison, but he refused to cooperate. Kendall refused to be interviewed, but he did take a lie detector test, which he reportedly failed. He was later killed in a motorcycle accident. The tip has never been confirmed. No charges have been filed in Mary's disappearance. Authorities searched the backyard of Ernest Dockenhausen's former home in September 2007, and also brought him to the search site. He said he knew Dominic, but he had nothing to do with Mary's disappearance. Some buried cars were located during the search. In April 2008, Dockenhausen was charged with a misdemeanor count of interfering with a police investigation in Mary's disappearance. Authorities stated he gave false and leading information to the police. At the trial, authorities identified Dominic as the prime suspect in Mary's presumed death. Dockenhausen was acquitted at his trial in May 2009. Dominic was convicted of attempted bribery in connection with Mary's disappearance in June 2013. He had attempted to interfere with the grand jury probe into Mary's disappearance by offering the presiding judge $100,000. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Mary has 11 siblings. She attended Danbury High School, but dropped out at 16 to marry her first husband. They had 2 daughters and divorced a few years later. Mary worked sporadically as a bartender and a house cleaner after the divorce, and frequently changed residences. She enjoyed painting and drawing as a hobby. She married Dominic in 1970. He has 4 children from a prior marriage. Some agencies may list Southbury, Connecticut as the location of Mary's disappearance. Her case remains unsolved. 9. Lynn Schuler. Lynn was last seen at her home in the 3100 block of 30th Street Drive Southeast in Cedar Rapids, Iowa on August 6, 1972. Her husband, Keith Schuler, said when he and their 3-year-old son left the house to go fishing at 7:30 a.m., Lynn was asleep. When they returned 5 hours later, Lynn was gone and so was her bicycle. Keith left a note for his wife and then took their son out again. He returned home an hour later and Lynn's bicycle had reappeared, lying on its side in the front yard, but she was nowhere to be found. Keith stated Lynn normally took good care of her bicycle and it would be uncharacteristic of her to leave it lying in the yard. All her belongings were left behind, including her purse and clothes. She has never been heard from again. Shortly after the investigation into Lynn's disappearance began, Keith was arrested on a charge of refusing to assist an officer after he refused to search in the woods for her. He said he'd already checked the woods and knew Lynn wasn't there. The charge was later dismissed, but police searched the Schuler home and confiscated, among other things, a snow shovel, a machete, 2 knives and a spade. Keith ceased cooperating with the investigation early on and hired an attorney. Lynn's parents, who lived in Minnesota in 1972, suspected Keith had murdered his wife. Lynn met him when she was only a teenager and began a long-distance relationship with him. They married in 1967, and had their son 2 years later. For the first few years their marriage was untroubled, but the Schulers had been having marital problems for some time by the time Lynn disappeared. Keith had asked for a divorce the previous year, but Lynn refused it. A few months before she went missing, She wrote to her mother and said Keith had threatened her life, but she didn't believe he would act on the threat. Keith owned a 6-foot alligator and some snakes in 1972. There were rumors that he disposed of his wife's remains by feeding them to the reptiles. Police discounted this idea, saying Keith's pets were too small to have consumed an entire human body. He filed for divorce 7 times after Lynn disappeared, but each time he dropped the case when Lynn's parents got involved on her behalf. He finally got a divorce in 1976, going to another county so he could do it without his in-laws' knowledge. He had Lynn declared legally dead in 1978, and their son inherited her life insurance benefits. Keith married another woman, but they are now divorced. He now lives in another part of the country. He maintains his innocence in Lynn's disappearance. Lynn is described as a quiet, reclusive individual and a devout Christian Scientist. She had few friends and focused most of her life on her son. She did have a job as a bookkeeper with an insurance company, and was well liked by her co-workers. Foul play is suspected in her disappearance, which remains unsolved. 10. Louise Faulner. During the 1970s, Louise Faulner lived in Australia with her husband and 3 children. But the marriage came to an end once she became romantically involved with an older married man named George Sutherland, who also divorced his wife. Louise eventually became pregnant and gave birth to a daughter named Charmian on October 30, 1977. Around the same time, George reconciled with his ex-wife, and even though they never officially remarried, they lived together in a rural home in Parker's Corner. Nevertheless, George continued his relationship with Louise but never acknowledged being Charmian's father. On April 26, 1980, Louise and Charmian left their residence in Melbourne. Louise spoke to one of her friends, and said that they were traveling to a potato farm. They soon climbed into a white Holden ute being driven by an unidentified individual and disappeared without a trace. At the time, George Sutherland worked at a potato farm, where he reportedly had access to a Holden ute. He became the prime suspect but always maintained he hadn't seen Louise and Charmian since March. Shortly after the disappearances, George sold off his Parker's Corner property and traveled to the United States with his wife, where they made a failed attempt at permanent residency before returning to Australia 3 years later. She knows things about the special kind of chemical a lifeless body exudes, things about phone tappings, DNA and cadaver dogs. She counts other crime celebrities, she says with a wry smile and an eye roll, as friends. They are people like the mother of Gary Adams, the Cranbourne teenager who was murdered by her ex-partner, and the daughter of Marie Greenington, the Frankston grandmother who was sexually abused and killed by 2 teenagers. And don't even get Malia Faulkner started on the phone calls from the psychics and the crazies. You always get the psychics, you know, saying the body's near water or something. Well, ring the police, she said. Oh, and the long-lost sister. In June she received a message from a woman who said she always knew her parents weren't her parents and she was, in fact, Ms. Faulkner's sister. She was a crazy, Ms. Faulkner said matter-of-factly. When your mother and your baby sister disappear without a trace, you become part of the terrible club of people carrying a weight of questions after their loved one has vanished. And when your case becomes a murder investigation, you grow used to morbid information and the limelight that new leads, $100,000 rewards and an inquest brings. This time, it's because of National Missing Persons Week that starts on Sunday that Ms. Faulkner speaks publicly. She knows that every time the case is in the media, there are phone calls to police, and despite 34 years having passed, she still hopes for the right one. Someone knows where the bodies are. These people always tell someone, Ms. Faulkner said. Her mother Louise Faulkner was 43 and her sister Charmian Faulkner just 2 when they went missing, last seen leaving their flat in Auckland Street, Kilda, in April 1980. Louise's older lover George Sutherland was named in the 2006 inquest as a suspect. Ms. Faulkner believes he is still alive, aged well into his 90s and living in Tasmania. Ms. Faulkner isn't as energetic compared to the days she ran a website to better publicize missing people, or when she started her own investigation into their disappearance. She is now trying to live beyond the shadow of what happened to her when she was just a child. She lives on the Mornington Peninsula with her dog and cat, and she rarely speaks about the case. There is no closure. It's learning to live with it, she said. But the yearning for the right phone call to come never leaves her. It means I can have a funeral, she said. However, The writer never came forward, and when an inquest was held into the disappearances that same year, George refused to testify on the ground that he might incriminate himself. The disappearance of Louise and Charmian Faulner remains one of Australia's biggest unsolved mysteries.